Violet swears she can feel his non-existent eyebrows raise.
See, even Taryn is picking up on that shit. You just freaking know it.
He's nosy.
He is so nosy. Taryn is a little gossip, okay? I feel like he acts like he's above all that, but he likes to know what's up. He likes
Oh, yeah. Welcome to the Booked on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Madison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through the shows and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. We are so pumped to bring y'all our very first episode diving into Onyx Storm. It was a little disorienting to transition my brain back to Navarre and Basgiath after being in the Throne of Glass world for so long, but it's good to be back, baby.
Oh, yeah. And forget about Navarre. I'm just happy to be back with Xaden Ryerson.
Zaddy! As a quick reminder, we are a spoiler-free podcast. So that means we are only discussing the chapters listed because we are not reading ahead and we don't know what's coming. With that being said, we will be discussing the prologue through chapter 6 specifically today. But since this is the third book in the Empyrean series, we will definitely have spoilers for the first two books, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, because we frequently refer back to the first two books to contextualize events in Onyx Storm. I would hope that if you're here, you would have read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame already, but you never know. So this is your spoiler warning. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. For those of you that have been listening to our Throne of Glass coverage, we have finished recording our final two episodes to finish Queen of Shadows. So we are going to wrap that up, we promise. We just need to get those edited, and then we'll, of course, post them as soon as possible. Once we finish Onyx Storm coverage, we will then jump back into Throne of Glass with Empire of Storms. Next, if you are reading along with us, then our next episode will cover chapters 7 through 12. And finally, we are always dying to know what people think about Onyx Storm, without spoilers, of course. But if anyone has any crazy theories or comments to make, then definitely send us a text. It's really easy to do so. You can find a link in the episode description that literally says send us a text, and it comes straight to us. Although we cannot respond to those text messages, we receive them. But if you want a response from us, then the best thing to do is either to email us or DM us on Instagram. All right, so that's all for housekeeping, and now let's get into the episode. We will start with the book report, where Addison will summarize each chapter. Next, we will convene a meeting of the assembly, where we will deep dive, analyze, and theorize each chapter. Finally, to end the episode, we'll share our favorite moments from the set of chapters discussed. With that being said, Addison, please give us the book report.
Happily. Prologue. We start in the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Basgiath. Violet trails Xaden through the halls and realizes he's going to see Jack fucking Barlow. As she makes her way to the interrogation chamber, Violet and Andarna discuss finding her family so they can learn how her magic allowed her to be able to burn and kill the venin that attacked Violet and Kat during the battle. Mustering all the bravado she could, she quickly talks the guards into letting her into the interrogation chamber, where she overhears Jack telling Xaden it's not if he draws power from Violet, it's when. Chapter 1. Violet and her squad were patrolling the skies in search of rogue venin that were still lurking after the battle. Miraculously, Taryn was able to fly in the heavy snow and ice and avoid a collision with Atrum despite having to carry the burden of his ego. Taryn reluctantly agrees to support Violet in her quest to find the rest of Andarna's den and cure Xaden, even though he believes there is no chance of curing Xaden, who he now dramatically refers to as the Dark One. Once they're back on the ground, Violet and Imogen have a brief conversation about what the hell Mira is up to, and that she and Bodhi and Garrick all think she should reconsider her sleeping arrangements with Xaden. Violet tells them to fuck off, and I honestly can't say that I blame her. Violet heads to the infirmary to visit Sawyer and meet with the rest of her squad, but they are interrupted by the scream of an infantry cadet. They hadn't found venin out on patrol because they were already inside. Chapter 2. Violet, Riddick, and Rhiannon spring into action to track and kill the venin that have infiltrated the walls of Basgiath. They quickly figure out that their target is Jack, and they make their way to the interrogation chamber, dispatching a venin that was disguised as a scribe on the way. Once in the chamber, it's absolute chaos. One rider is already dead while the other is pinned to the table with knives with a venin poised to slit his throat. Violet also can't help but notice a venin with a long silver braid and a faded tattoo on her forehead. But she disappears? ? The battle ensues, but it doesn't last long because shadows flood the room and Xaden Ryerson enters the chat. Swoon. His shadows stroke her cheek and he utters the question we've all been asking. Tell me something, Violence. Why is it always you? After a quick debrief with Colonel Panchak, the crew goes to check on the rest of the squad, but Violet hangs back with Xaden where he makes it clear in no uncertain terms that he is not the same. But our girl, who is clearly in denial, insists that nothing has changed because the one thing that hasn't changed is Xaden's deep, unfailing love for Violet Sorrengail. Chapter 3. It's time for Violet's meeting with the Senarium, and things do not go as Violet expected. It turns out Violet is in fact only a second-year cadet with no real power when it comes to rank and influence. Despite things not turning out exactly how she wanted, Llewellyn assures her that he will work on Andarna's list of demands. The next morning, Violet wakes up to find that Xaden is sleeping in. Not wanting to disturb him, she quietly slips out of bed, but it isn't long before Xaden wakes up and they both completely forget that he is a venin, and losing any shred of control could be catastrophic for him. It turns out, even if Xaden keeps his pants on during adult fun time, it's still too much, and they both get a proverbial bucket of ice water thrown on them when they realize Xaden started to channel. Chapter 4. Violet attempts to reassure a very upset Xaden, and to my absolute horror, Xaden says that they can't do anything sexy again because he can't afford to lose control around her. Not even the edge of it. Boo! As they get ready for the day, they are interrupted by Brennan and basically everyone else, who I guess they were all just standing outside Violet's door while she and Xaden were getting hot and heavy. Anyway, Mira shows up and everyone disperses to do their duties while Mira shows Violet what she has been working on with Trissa. What was Mira doing, you might ask? That is a great fucking question. We have absolutely no idea, but it is something to do with tempering runes and altering materials and plants, ? We don't know. Violet is practically glowing with happiness because now they have a shot, but Brennan shows up and lets it slip that Violet is on a special task force to find the rest of Andarna's den. Being the protective big sister she is, Mira absolutely loses her shit that Brennan is allowing this to happen, and the conversation ends with Mira throwing the super secret rune disc at Brennan and telling him he needs to take a good, long, hard look in the mirror. Chapter 5. A few hours later, Violet and her squad are in the gathering hall waiting for news from Mira and Brennan, but a commotion quickly distracts them when a breathless Sloane races into the room and tells them that Aura fucking Binehaven is trying to force a challenge with one of the fliers. Violet and her squad grab Dane and take off to the courtyard. When they arrive, it's pandemonium. They quickly shove back all the fliers, and Dane instructs them to de-escalate at all costs. I guess I must have missed the de-escalation class all cadets are required to take. Dane tries to talk Aura down, but the Navarrian riders are too fucking jazzed, and the fight begins. But Aura had no intention of this being a normal hand-to-hand challenge. She prepared to take her glove off to wield fire against Dane, and Violet, realizing what Aura was about to do, threw a dagger, pinning her hand against the wall and said, "If you're going to wield, then it's me you'll be dealing with." Chapter 6. Violet gives an awe-inspiring standing ovation-worthy speech, but before the Navarrian riders respond, Professor Devera interrupts, thank Dune. Devera basically asks them what the fuck they think they're doing and tells everyone it's back to reality and classes start tomorrow. Everyone disperses except for Violet and Art, who go with Mira, Brennan, and Llewellyn to the sparring gym so Brennan can give her the news. Luckily for our girl, the Senarium agreed to all of Andarna's demands, including letting her hunt in the King's Forest whenever she pleases. Unfortunately, they didn't win arguably the most important demand of letting the fliers into the quadrant, forcing Violet to have to consider Plan B, which will definitely make her a traitor by morning. Everyone departs so Xaden can tell Violet the quote-unquote good news, and Xaden tells her that the king gave back his title and seat in the Senarium. Xaden Ryerson wasn't the Duke of Aretian anymore. He is the Duke of Tyrrendor. And that concludes the book report.
Wow.
I know. Holy shit. Wow.
A lot of thinking was going on in this chapter.
Oh, a lot of thinking. Lorraine and I were thinking real hard.
Okay, thank you for the book report. And now let's convene our meeting with the assembly for our analysis, starting with some overarching thoughts.
Normally, our overarching thoughts aren't quite this long, but this one's a bit of a doozy because it includes the dedication analysis, as well as the content warning. So just bear with us. My first overarching thought is, to be honest, for this first set of chapters, I felt a little confused. I was surprised by that because, speaking only on behalf of myself, I have a pretty good memory, especially for details in books, and I've read Iron Flame multiple times. The last time was very recent. The general sentiment I've seen on the internet is that a lot of people felt this way, and I think there are a few reasons why. The first is that Violet has always used reciting facts to calm herself in perilous situations. The best example of this is in Fourth Wing when she's crossing the parapet. This is a very clever way for the author to inform us and world build more seamlessly. But part of Violet's journey has been developing an extreme sense of bravery, and so she doesn't need to calm herself as often, so you don't have the benefit of that world building technique right off the bat in this book. The next reason is the pace is slower in the first two books. Fourth Wing is literally the introduction to the entire series, so obviously you're being slow rolled into the world. And although there is a big reveal in Iron Flame, the pace is also much slower, and she's surrounded by completely familiar characters. And there aren't that many, right? In Iron Flame, she wakes up, Xaden's there, and Brennan. And then we slowly get introduced to the assembly and all that. For Onyx Storm, we jump in literally right after the Battle of Basgiath has occurred. The prologue could quite literally be the next chapter, and I think it makes it jarring because it's been over a year since Iron Flame was released. I also think it's important to note that Rebecca Yarros intended for this series to be only 3 books, and it was when she was in the middle of writing Iron Flame that she called her publisher and was like, yes, this is going to need to be a 5-book series. And of course, they were like, yep, absolutely. And of course, we were also like, yes, absolutely. In reality, based on that comment by Rebecca Yarros, I actually think of Iron Flame as part 1 and Onyx Storm part 2. And I think that kind of shows in how the pace of Onyx Storm is written. So I think that's a big reason why it's such a different experience from Fourth Wing and Iron Flame.
Yeah. If you did an Iron Flame reread right before you're getting into Onyx Storm, that was probably great, because had I not done that, I think I would have been very confused. I was just trying to piece together where we are in the book, who all these characters are, all the politics of these first several chapters. And so without Iron Flame fresh on my brain, I can only imagine how much more difficult it would have been to try to orient myself.
Oh, absolutely. And we're not complaining or knocking it. It's just, I know this has been a common consensus among the fandom. And so, I did some thinking about that and why that might be. Next, we have to talk about the dedication. I'm actually going to read it because I think it's really nice. It says, to the ones who don't run with the popular crowd, the ones who get caught reading under their desk, the ones who feel like they never get invited, included, or represented, get your leathers. We have dragons to ride. I really love this dedication. Whether that's something you're experiencing right now or something you felt in the past, I think all of us can relate to the feeling of being excluded. Something that I think Rebecca Yarros does an absolutely beautiful job of in this series is working in very organic inclusion. There is a lot of representation in these books, and it just feels so natural. I think this dedication is also just very empowering. It's really just saying, just because you feel like you're on the outside doesn't mean you can't do incredible things. And I think that's really nice.
I do too. I really enjoyed the dedication as well.
And then lastly, for the content warning, I'm not going to read it because I think it's been roughly the same for all 3 books, but I did have some quick thoughts about it. The first is, I was extremely distraught when I read Animal Death because it immediately made me fear and worry for my beloved dragons. Okay, I really fucking love dragons. But then I was also immediately relieved to see that there would be sexual activities that would be shown on the page. So mixed bag with the content warning.
I hope so, because I guess there was going to be 6 sex scenes in this book. So, but after this first set of chapters, I was like, shoot, I think I way overshot on that estimate.
Oh, you did.
Because it seems like that's not going to be a good idea. So,
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
The general takeaways that I had in terms of like the set of chapters is that A, tensions are extremely high, both among the writers and the flyers, and also between Navarre and Perot. And B, we have a pretty good idea of where a large portion of this book is gonna go. They need to figure out more information about Andarna because it's heavily implied that she's going to be a major factor in learning how to defeat the venin. Aside from that, one of my outstanding questions that I want more clarification around is how the fuck the venin are able to do quite a large variety of things within the wards when the entire point of having the wards is because they protect against the venin. I won't say it's a plot hole, but I'd like a more clear explanation of what the wards are actually preventing the venin from doing. There are several conversations and mentions throughout these chapters of needing to, stay in Basgiath, be protected within the wards, and how Jack and Xaden are limited by the wards. But they seem to be doing and feeling plenty regardless of that. I don't know. I'm just a little bit confused about that. It could be that I'm just fucking dumb, but I would like some more answers.
Oh, absolutely. This is something Lorraine and I were discussing because we've been, working on notes and preparing for this episode for days. And I kind of was like sitting there and I was like, wait, why the fuck did they need the wards again? Because it didn't stop anybody from turning venin. It didn't stop them from drawing power. It didn't stop them from fucking apparating in and out, whatever was going on with that silver-haired venin. The only thing that she and I could come up with right now is that it stops wyvern, right? The wyvern can exist within the wards. But other than that, seems like the venin are still pretty damn lethal within the wards. I mean, in Iron Flame, an entire horde of them were able to cross into Navarre. So I don't know. That's definitely something we're going to reference, we're going to talk a lot about, and hopefully we'll get some answers as we continue to read.
That wraps up our overarching thoughts, and now let's actually get into each of the chapters, starting with the prologue. Of course, we always have the excerpt blurbs at the beginning of each chapter. The excerpt discusses correspondence from General Melgren to King Tauri. We know this takes place immediately after the final battle in Iron Flame, since Lilith is now dead. It also foreshadows the political nature of where Navarre stands in relation to Poromiel. They are now attempting to negotiate an alliance with Poromiel, since prior to this, Poromiel has been considered, quote-unquote, an enemy to Navarre.
This round of negotiations with Poromiel, as well as the other provinces, is known as the Senarium, that is meeting throughout this first set of chapters, which we will obviously be discussing in depth.
So basically, this means Navarre has realized that they need to negotiate with Poromiel, both to gain access to their fliers to fight against the venin, and also work on securing the border area along the Stonewater River, since that has been the path that the venin are attacking along. We also know Zoya has fallen, which has created a pretty big vulnerability for Poromiel. Navarre also needs Poromiel to stop attacking their outposts for the alloy-hilted daggers, because those help boost the wards, and they can't afford weakening wards at this time.
To set us up timeline-wise, the prologue takes place in the immediate aftermath of the battle at Basgiath. Violet tells us that Xaden stayed with her for hours while they waited for Sawyer to get out of surgery. Once they knew Sawyer was okay, they went to sleep, and Violet was woken up when she heard Xaden leaving the room. Where we start in the prologue is with Violet following Xaden to see what the hell he is up to. And of course, from the end of Iron Flame, we already know that he's going to talk to Jack Barlow.
During this spy session, she has several notable thoughts in a conversation with Andarna. Violet notes how dangerous it is for Xaden to be walking around because of the strawberry red circles around his irises, since he turned a venin at the end of Iron Flame. Violet also figures that those circles will fade at this phase eventually, and this indicates Xaden's status as an initiate venin, as is indicated by Jack in the conversation she overhears shortly.
Something that really stood out to me is Violet seems extremely scared that someone will notice Xaden's red-rimmed eyes and that he will be arrested and likely executed. On the one hand, I'm sure everyone is on high alert, and they're probably much more likely to be on venin watch. But at this moment, I think even if someone did notice the red rim around his eyes, their first thought would not be that Xaden Ryerson has turned venin. I think they would probably think he's fucking exhausted from using a shit ton of magic and physically exerting himself in a battle that they just had. But I do understand the paranoia and fear, but that did seem a little, not silly, but I don't know, it just seemed a little odd to me.
I also think it's important to remember most people do not know and have not had that many experiences with venin. Violet has had an extremely unusual amount of interactions with them because of resin and fighting them in all these other instances, but nobody else within the college really knows freaking anything. I mean, the venin were hiding in plain sight and nobody noticed. So,
oh my God, that's so true, right? They didn't notice all the fucking venin being disguised as scribes, but she's like, one look at Xaden's eyes and they'll fucking know. That's a really fucking good point, Lorraine.
Nobody's gonna know. They're
gonna know.
No.
Nobody's gonna know. How would they know?
And Dorna also mentions that Sagael and Taryn are currently refusing to speak, which makes sense because they are pissed at the end of Iron Flame when Xaden turns venin.
We'll talk about this more as we progress through these chapters, but right now it feels like Taryn is honestly even more pissed than Sagael at Xaden for turning.
Yeah. We don't even hear from Sagael at all in this set of chapters, which is kind of crazy.
Well, she's just not talking to him. That's what Xaden says. Yeah. She's just icing him out.
I also find it touching that Violet takes note of the snow falling outside as she crosses the bridge, and the temperature also drops. And Darna says it began about an hour ago, and Violet interrupts to say, don't go there. This felt like an ode to Lilith because Lilith was a storm wielder. We learn in chapter 1 that it's January, thus the winter weather, but Lilith usually influenced it according to what they needed for the battle against the venin at the end of Iron Flame, and probably just in general for the dragons. With Lilith now dead, the weather is returning to what it normally would be.
Oh, now I'm sad again. I love how protective and caring Darna is when it comes to Violet. She can immediately sense that Violet is thinking of her mom and simultaneously trying to compartmentalize. But Darna tells her, you can grieve. And I think that's nice that Darna gives her the space for that. Taryn is not the most socially, emotionally compassionate dragon, so I'm glad that Violet has somebody that can be that for her.
And Darna is like the ultimate Team Violet supporter. She's like, we're going to do whatever's necessary. You can grieve, whatever you want, Violet. We're going to go do it.
She really is. She's such a good friend. She really is. When Violet gets to the interrogation chamber, it is guarded, and at first they deny her entry, but once they realize who she is and she reminds them of her mother's sacrifice, they decide to let her in. Goverson, the guard, says, 10 minutes, 5 for your mother and 5 for you. We know who saved us today. I think this highlights just how powerful Violet really is. She is literally the only weapon besides alloy-infused daggers that can take down a venin. And we see because she is so special that she's able to use that as leverage with the Senarium later. Because of her critical importance to the war effort, she gets to do a lot of shit that I don't think other second-year cadets would get the privilege to do. Not without being executed.
Yeah,
honestly.
But in general, definitely more than your average cadet.
Oh, for sure. Violet then thinks, but he doesn't know. None of them realize the sacrifice Xaden made to kill the sage, their general. I called attention to this because throughout this set of chapters, Violet is in hardcore denial mode about Xaden's situation. I think at the end of Iron Flame, a lot of us were confused that Xaden turned venin, and then a few hours later, Violet was sleeping at bed with him. I think we were all kind of like, wait, what? Because it would stand to reason that Violet would more than likely be very upset and angry with Xaden. But it's clear to see that Violet is not angry at all for what he did. In fact, it almost has made her hold Xaden up on a pedestal because he sacrificed his soul to save them all. I get the logic, but I don't know, it's just very different in the way that I thought that Violet was going to react at the end of Iron Flame.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And she's, as we talked a little bit about before, in total and complete denial about the true danger of this situation to everybody. Even later, as she continues speaking with Darna, she says, he isn't a soulless venin. If he'd completely lost himself, he would have drained me at any number of points tonight, especially while I slept. And I was like, girl, he comes close to doing it later on. And obviously, even a small amount of channeling can be addictive from everything that everybody is saying about it. Plus, it literally seems like it is physically difficult for him to keep himself in control around Violet. Spending every night together and being like, he can control himself is assuming a lot. It's quite literally like putting, some drugs in front of an addict and being like, they won't do it. But we all know that it's so much harder to resist something when it's right in front of you. I mean, to give a much more relatable context, think about how much you check your phone just by like having it near you when you're trying to work. If I want to prevent myself from checking my phone or like being distracted by it, I literally have to go put it in another room, or else it's just reflexive to check it. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think what you just said is exactly how Xaden and Violet feel when they have their little steamy scene. He's like, I just woke up and it was just so natural to touch you. Like, Xaden has been a venin for approximately 2 weeks by the end of this set of chapters. And so I still think he's taking the time to learn what it's like for him and how it affects him. And instead of Violet's like, he's completely the same. Nothing has changed. Everything is fine. Do not look over here. Everybody mind your own fucking business. And you're like, girl, no.
Major side-eye. So
Major side-eye.
The next part of their conversation shifts to Andarna after she agrees to side with Violet about the Xaden situation. Andarna says, I am as unknown as he is, and you still trust me, and then provides some really interesting insight about why she was able to scorch the venin with her fire.
At this point, I'm going to let Lorraine take over the conversation because she has a theory that is kind of crazy, but kind of works. I learned the hard way in our Third of Glass deep dives and not to dismiss her crazy theories, because when that brain starts cooking, it's usually a 5-course meal.
Okay. Guys, bear with me. I know this is going to sound totally and completely crackhead, and it very well might be, but it's probably also kind of entertaining. So, Andarna says, magic feels different when I change color. Maybe my use of power in that moment altered the venin and weakened her enough to blister. So, we know Andarna can basically camouflage. In chapter 63 of Iron Flame, Andarna disguised herself, and Violet distinctly said Andarna looked like part of the cliff. So this is the beginning of my early stage theory. Everyone was surprised Andarna's fire could kill venin. And the only other thing we know of that can kill venin are the alloy daggers that are imbued, or also Violet's pure power. Alloy daggers are an amalgamation of palladium, a few other ores, and dragon egg shells. This is information we got in chapter 20 of Iron Flame. The process of imbuing the daggers involves dragon fire. Also, locationally, the cliffs are close to the Vale, which means it's not unlikely there are dragon shells and probably metals and ores in the earth of the cliffs as well. So, what if, by whatever magical process occurred, when Andarna morphed into the cliff, she somehow, became, quote unquote, an alloy dagger in a way because she took in some of the properties of the metals, and her own fire that she breathes out then imbues the necessary magic that altered it in a way to then destroy the venin.
What? Man, you thunked real hard about that one, didn't you?
Obviously, this is completely unhinged. But personally, I feel like it actually kind of makes a little bit of sense. In general, it can't be a coincidence that Andarna and alloy daggers can kill venin. So I do think it's worth investigating if there are any connections to be made.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they need every weapon they can get, so they've got to do some investigation into this. Violet should call you for some theories. You can be her
guys, this will not be the last time I make a crazy theory. I can definitely guarantee you that.
Oh, definitely not. Something else that stood out to me about this conversation is when Andarna says, that could alter ... everything. Considering this is just the prologue, we definitely don't have enough information to flesh out a full theory. Well, Lorraine does, but I don't. But the language of altering everything makes me think that Andarna will likely be part of the cure for venin because she can alter the state of things. This sentiment is also echoed later by Andarna when she says, if I'm right and I somehow altered that venin inadvertently while changing my skills, then the rest of my kind should know how to master the tactic, how to change him, cure him. So Andarna also thinks that she may be able to help with Xaden, which please let her be able to help.
I feel pretty certain that Andarna's breed is going to be a part of the cure, and that is obviously the main objective in the book. They may not fully cure Xaden, but they'll at least possibly figure out how they can. A large part of this book will likely also involve traveling to find the rest of Andarna's den, as is stated when she thinks we both know the order to locate my kind is inevitable now that your leadership knows what I am. Violet gets within earshot of Jack and Xaden's conversation and overhears Jack say, "You can fight it all you want, but that power streaming through her veins, there's a reason the higher-ups want her." I do think within the fandom there's been discussion of who the venin actually want. I am inclined to believe Violet is the main target because of how she is basically pure power, and there were so many statements made from the venin Violet encounters alluding to how badly she is wanted. And this statement from Jack seems to feed into that idea.
On the one hand, I do completely agree with you, but then I start thinking about all the evidence that there is to support that they want Xaden too, and I don't know. I think right now I am firmly in the camp of they want both of them, but for different reasons.
Xaden also refuses to believe he would ever draw from Violet, but Jack's ominous response does worry me. He says, "You will slip, and afterward, well, let's just say that silver hair that has you so besotted will be gray like the rest of her, and those weak-ass initiate rings in your eyes won't just last a few days. They'll be permanent." I'm going to be honest, this feels like some foreshadowing that Xaden is going to end up drawing from Violet, even if it is involuntarily, or it's setting us up for the main conflict between Violet and Xaden moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. In our intro episode for Onyx Storm, I believe we both predicted he would purposely or accidentally draw from Violet. I just feel like that's inevitable.
So obviously Violet gets pissed by Jack's lack of faith in Xaden's self-control, but she thinks, "Xaden is mine. I'll scour the world until I find a way to save him right back, even if it takes bargaining with Takaris for access to every book on the continent or capturing dark wielders to question." So I kind of forgot about this, but Takaris had that whole book of research on venin that he gives to Brennan. So I can only imagine what else he knows from all of his collecting of unique things and the research he's been doing on the venin.
Not only does he have an incredible library, he literally had a fucking venin as a prisoner to question. So I think it's a safe bet he probably has a lot of info available to him about the venin. So I think it's probably a good idea for Violet to try to get access to that.
The chapter closes with the understanding that Violet will have to keep anything related to protect Xaden a secret, and she would need Imogen's help. This is not confirmed in the chapter, but you can assume Violet is going to ask Imogen to wipe Jack's memory since they can't kill him without drawing attention, but they need to make sure he doesn't say anything to anyone else. And that concludes the prologue. Moving on to chapter 1.
So just a quick timeline note, it is now 2 weeks after the Battle of Basgiath. It's also now January.
The excerpt only says, "I will save him," which Violet adds as like a change to the book of Brennan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I was like, girl, write your own book. Like, don't mess Brennan's book up. But anyways, I do feel like that sentiment matches Violet's energy starting off in this book. We've noted she feels a bit in denial, but we also know her main goal is going to be to figure out how to cure venin and thus save Xaden.
Oh, yeah. For the first 2 books, her mantra has been, "I will not die today." And now it seems, based on this excerpt, that we'll be switching that up to, "I will save him," at least for this book.
Violet is on venin patrol with Taryn, and one of the first things that is mentioned is the Senarium meeting happening that afternoon. This meeting is being held between Peromiel and representatives of all the Navarrian provinces to discuss peace and alliances. It's also unprecedented, which indicates this is the first time ever that something like this has occurred on Basgiath's campus. The venin patrols are necessary because Violet notes that dark wielders may have limited power within the wards, but the ones who didn't escape post-battle have the element of surprise to add multiple names to the death roll. This is foreshadowing for what is about to occur in the next chapter, but we know venin have infiltrated campus and the surrounding area because of Jack Barlow's lures that he mentions in Iron Flame. But this comment indicates that they've been popping out to kill riders. We also know from Iron Flame that the venin have been able to exist inside the wards, so there's no telling how many have been hiding and for how long. And Darna has gotten extra sassy, but her little snarky comments that she makes towards Taryn are hilarious. She makes fun of him when he says, "Your wings won't hold the weight of this ice," and then she says, "And yet yours miraculously carry the burden of your ego."
I know we're probably going to say this infinity times throughout this book, but I live for 3 things in this series: sassy and Darna, Riddick's jokes, and obviously Xaden Ryerson.
Retweet, yeah. Violet's patrol today also includes Ree and Fierge, Quinn and Kruth, and Riddick and Atrum. The cadets are responsible for patrolling around Basgiath, while the professors have been scouting the rest of Navarre. So far, the cadets have killed 31 men in total, with Xaden being responsible for 17 of those kills alone. This will be explained later because no, it's not just that. Xaden is extra awesome.
Which when I first read that, the first time I was like, oh yeah, because Xaden's so badass. And then later I was like, oh, he has a very unfair advantage. Right?
After an almost run-in with Riddick and Atrum, Violet's thought was notable. She thinks the loss of constant connection sucks, but he doesn't trust himself or what he thinks he'll become to keep it open yet. There's a lot of uncertainty for Xaden and everyone else, honestly, about how keeping his connection to Violet and by proxy the other dragons open will ultimately affect him. So basically, this is a precautionary measure until they figure out how to help him, and it explains why he constantly has his shields up with Violet. Also, it's very important to know that the venin share a collective conscience, which makes it extra critical that he keep her blocked as much as possible to limit what the venin could find out about her. We know Terran and Zagael are super pissed at Xaden, and I found it funny that Terran refers to him as the Dark One. But he does make a good point when he says his soul is no longer his own. That kind of power is addictive. You know it, or you wouldn't be pretending to sleep at night. Ultimately, we know Terran's primary concern is protecting Violet as well, and it's for that reason only that he supports her plans to go search for Indarna's 7th dragon breed, since they speculate her breed could be the key to finding a cure.
I also think Terran is trying to give Violet a little reality check here. Even though Terran does agree, as Lorraine said, he's really only going in support of Indarna and Violet, because he even says, but do not mistake my unflinching support of you, my mate, and Indarna for any form of faith in him. And this will definitely not be the last time that he fucking roasts Xaden.
Absolutely not. Back on the flight field, we learned that Atrum had almost run into them because he was arguing with Riddick over whether to stay in Basgiath or go back to Aretian. This is a common sentiment among the dragons and is a point of tension since the Aretian riders are still considered deserters. Their pardoning for that has yet to be decided or officiated, and this thought also foreshadows the arguments that occur in chapters 5 and 6 as well. As they make their way into the quadrant, Violet thinks about what Mira is working on that will hopefully solve the issue between Navarrian and Aretian riders and the fliers, which we get more information about later on. Whatever Mira is doing is treason if they're caught, and war if the fliers are caught, and it's imperative that they keep it on the DL. Plus, it turns out to basically be like their only card that they can negotiate with, so...
Yeah, pretty much. I thought it was absolutely hysterical that Imogen and Violet are having this very serious conversation, and in the background you hear Rhiannon yelling at Riddick because he froze the door shut. And then she's like, described Riddick as just cackling in the background, and she's like, get back here and fix it right this instant. I live for Riddick. He is so great in this set of chapters. Yeah.
He provides a lot of comedic relief, which I think is important. He
really does. Yes, you need it in this series.
Imogen and Violet go on to discuss Xaden and her mission with Indarna. And I do appreciate that Imogen, Garrick, and Bodhi are all very concerned, but she, of course, refuses to accept to sleep separately from him.
And girl, I do not blame her. I would spend every night with Xaden Ryerson for eternity, okay? Venin or not. But in all seriousness, it's nice to see them care about Violet, not because of her connection to Xaden and the whole if she dies, Xaden dies thing, but because they actually care about her. For a long time in Fourth Wing, that was a big point of contention for Violet. She was like, you guys don't give a shit about me. You just care about Xaden living. And now it seems like their relationships have evolved, that they really do care about each other, independent of her connection to Xaden.
Yes, excellent point. I also found it interesting that Xaden doesn't want to know details about the mission to find more of Indarna's den because he's worried about being an unintentional leak. So I'm assuming he's referring to the possibility of Venin figuring this information out. Obviously, that would be wildly dangerous, given the Venin would definitely go after Violet and these dragons for their power. I do wonder, though, if the Venin know about Indarna's breed from, like, way back in history, and how much do the Venin as an organized entity of evil know about, what kills them? We don't know for sure that Indarna will be the cure, but if she is, then that makes her breed, obviously, a huge target.
Oh, absolutely. In her conversation with Imogen, Violet says, Xaden, Dane, Ree, they're leaders. They inspire and command for the good of the unit. I'm just doing whatever it takes to save Xaden. This is both foreshadowing and a character note for Violet. Violet does not realize how powerful she is in the sense of her leadership abilities. I really feel in this book she's going to realize her leadership potential and gain confidence in her ability. It's also foreshadowing because in chapter 6, during the throwdown with Aura Bindhaven, she gives that really inspiring speech that de-escalates things.
Yeah, not to mention she's also a lightning wielder. She was like, watch this, guys. And she just
well, yeah, the speech helps
the shit out of everybody.
Also, Taryn and Darna probably don't hurt. She has quite a few assets in her corner, but regardless, I do think Violet in and of herself has more influence and power than she gives herself credit for.
She does, and she takes things into her own hands sometimes as well, which I think is kind of important, especially in times when they don't have time to wait necessarily, which is both good, but I can also see it becoming a problem in some instances too. So,
oh, absolutely.
They reach the healer's quadrant, and Violet spots a group of hooded scribes moving among the sleeping patients, no doubt still working to get accurate accounts of the battle. So this is foreshadowing for the fact that those scribes were venin and were draining those infantry cadets right in front of them without anyone noticing. Violet reaches her squad as they check in with Sawyer, who mentions getting a visit from Colonel Chandler, who is the commander of the retired soldiers. I feel so bad for Sawyer. Everyone insists he is still part of the squad, and he is, but realistically, there's not much he can really do right now. To be honest, I totally feel like if adjustments can be made to Violet's saddle and gear, then they probably could make something for Sawyer as well. Ultimately, his role within the squad is going to change.
I know, poor Sawyer. Now, I do have a thought that may spark some hope. I debated on saying this now because it's very early, but I decided to go ahead and do it just in case I'm right so that I can feel the ultimate triumph for getting this right in the first chapter of the book. I think it's a possibility that Andarna will be able to heal Sawyer's leg at some point. All of her talk about how she can alter the state of things makes me think that. I know that's a little far-fetched, but I'm just going to say it here because if I'm right, I will do many, many victory laps and I will never shut up about it. And if I'm wrong, I will never bring this up again. So
my only small counter to that is I think if they still had the other half of his leg, that could probably work. But I feel like altering something that doesn't exist anymore is like a totally different situation.
Fair.
I would love to think that this could definitely happen. I hope that it will happen.
I mean, but if they had the other half of his leg, then Brennan or Nolan could have mended it. They could have returned it to its original state. So I don't know.
Never say never.
Never say never. And I think you're right that if, Andor is not able to magically regrow Sawyer's leg, then I think they'll be able to make accommodations for him so he can still be a functioning member of the squad because they all promise each other that they all live, okay? And I am holding Rebecca Yarros to that fucking promise.
So very suddenly, there are screams that echo throughout the infirmary as an infantry cadet shouts, "They're all dead!" And unmistakable gray handprints signify that venin have entered the chat. Moving on to chapter 2. The excerpt at the beginning of this chapter highlights a couple important points. First, there's only been 2 instances in Navarre's history where 2 ultra-rare signets have manifested at the same time, and both of those times aligned with a critical time period of need. Second, the 6 most powerful were alive at the same time in history only once, which is crazy. So there's 2 major implications from this excerpt. First, it is not a coincidence that both Violet and Xaden are alive at the same time with ultra-rare signets. It's also entirely possible we will see other riders manifest super powerful signets as well. For example, Mira being able to create her own wards seems like a very rare thing. Second, the first 6 were responsible for coming together to activate and weave the first wards in Basgiath that extended out to protect Navarre's borders, which is a critically important part of history and is not entirely different from what their issues are now.
That's very true. So this begs the question, do we think this excerpt is foreshadowing that 4 other riders with incredibly powerful and rare signets will manifest, and the 6 of them will be part of the key to destroying the venin, or will it just be Violet and Xaden, another example of those 2 manifesting together that will be able to push back the venin?
I like the idea of there being 4 additional super cool rare signets.
Me too.
Possibly be on the lookout for people from the 6 different provinces, because those were the first 6, right? They represented one from each province. So, I'm going to keep it in the back of my mind, and I'm
Me too.
just like looking for it.
I know, I really like the idea. I tried to play it out of my mind, like who it could possibly be. So what I came up with was you obviously have Violet and Xaden. It's canon for me that Garrick is a distance wielder. I just feel this very deeply in my bones. It was in our predictions episode. So I'm going to pretend like that's accurate. I feel like it's very intentional that his signet has not been made public to us yet, and that she waited. Okay, then I think Mira's signet is pretty fucking rare and powerful. I don't know of anybody else who's been able to do that. And then, honestly, a little bit, you could argue that Bodhi's signet is extremely rare since his signet is to counter others. But even excluding him, we don't know what Aric's signet is. And it would not surprise me if he also had something extremely rare and powerful. So you have enough characters that have already been introduced that could fulfill the requirement of 6 rare signets.
Ooh, yes. I've been very curious about Garrick and also Eric's signet. I really want to know, because it seems like Eric's role in this book is going to become much more important. So
do not sleep on Aric. He is going to be really important. I don't know why yet, obviously, but I feel it in my bones.
So the first half of this chapter was the released Onyx Storm excerpt that we got a couple months ago, which was very exciting. But now we have more context. Yay! Marin is left to protect Sawyer, and everyone else leaps into action, running outside the infirmary, where it's noted that pretty much every bed in the hallway is now occupied with desiccated bodies.
This is a totally random small note, but when they're leaving the infirmary, Violet shouts at Winifred to lock the doors. And I knew that name sounded familiar, but I just could not freaking remember who she was. She is a healer, and most notably, she is Nolan, the Mender's wife. We get that brief scene with her in the very beginning of Fourth Wing when Imogen dislocates Violet's shoulder. But I just wanted to point that out because her name was so familiar, but I just couldn't place it. So I did a little ebook search.
So the commands are made and dragons are warned, with Andarna suggesting they bring their bodies outside once you're done killing them so we can roast them for fun.
Everything that comes out of Andarna's mouth is iconic. Everything she says.
I know, I love it.
It's also important to note as they make their way down the hall, they notice all the blankets on the overflow beds in the hallway have been thrown back, and all the patients that were in those beds have been desiccated by the venin. I wanted to note this because we really need to develop a working knowledge of what the venin are capable of within the wards, because previously we thought they were basically powerless within them. And obviously that has been proven false by Jack and Xaden and everything else that occurred. And this is really related to what we discussed as an overarching thought. We just don't know what powers they possess in the wards, but clearly they're able to desiccate people's bodies, no fucking problem.
So eventually they run into a scribe whose hood falls back, revealing red-rimmed eyes with spider-webbed veins at his temples, and Violet quickly flicks an alloy dagger, killing him because she knew a scribe would have run toward the archives. Based off this description, we can assume this venin is at least of ASIM rank, but you may hear me affectionately refer to them as ASIM because I struggle with pronouncing this word correctly for whatever reason. And I quite literally had to make myself like a little phonetic pronunciation note right here because it's not natural for me to say ASIM. I keep wanting to say ASIM, ASIM, like everything but the correct pronunciation.
Guys, you have no idea how many times we'd be having a discussion and she's like, ASIM. And I'm like, girl, no. So just roll with it, okay? Also, just something interesting I noticed, the venin that Violet kills dies immediately, and his body is described as his body shrivels in the span of a heartbeat, and then when Riddick moves it aside, it's described as a husk of a body. This is described very similarly to what happens to people when the venin drain them. So it's something that I hadn't really considered before, like what actually happens to a venin's body when they die, because it's kind of interesting that there's like no blood or anything. They just shrivel up like a husk, which is kind of weird and gross. Anyway,
Right.
also something I had not considered, and I am very surprised did not come up in Iron Flame during the big battle at the end, is that after Violet kills the venin with her dagger and she picks it back up, she thinks the alloy's hum of power is a little dimmer but still there, hopefully capable of another killing blow. This feels incredibly important that not only are these alloy-infused daggers the only thing that can kill venin besides Violet Lightning, but they lose power with each kill. This really seems like a huge logistical problem for them in big battles. And again, I do not understand how this did not become a problem for everyone during the battle in Iron Flame because they were just battling so many venin. You can only have so many daggers strapped to your body, and God forbid you throw them and you miss. Very quickly, if you're fighting, more than 3 venin, your weapon, the effects may be nullified. And this just feels like a really big world building problem that they need to explore and how to solve.
Yeah, I totally agree. This also immediately informs Violet and us that the venin have been hiding in plain sight among the scribes for quite a while without anybody noticing. Violet, Rhee, and Riddick continue down to the torture chamber where captured venin are imprisoned, including Jack Barlow. Once down the stairs, they spot 4 venin. 2 are dressed as scribes attempting to break Jack out of his cell. The third has a ruby-hilted sword that she uses to kill a second lieutenant cadet, and the 4th one stands at the edge of the shadows. One of the venin has a long silver braid, a faded tattoo on her forehead, and distorting red veins at her temples. She looks at Violet, and then she just, disappears. And I was like, what the fuck? How are you doing that? As far as we know, the only other venin we know of that operates like this was the sage that Violet encountered at the battle in Resin. And combined with the distorted branches of veins along this venin's temple, we can safely assume that this venin is at least of sage rank. So this is also extremely notable because Violet's hair has silver in it, and it's been a big source of speculation as to why that is.
Also, I feel like the tattoo on the forehead is really important. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I have no speculation why, but that feels significant. No other venin, even some of the higher up ones that we've been introduced to in the story, have been described that way, and I just think that is significant.
As they fight the remaining venin, one of the Dark Wielders shouts, "Not the silver hair, we need her." And shortly after that, they also comment, "The Lightning Wielder, you're a long way from the sky, and we both know you can't kill me with that knife." The first comment continues to indicate that Violet is especially wanted and important to the venin. There have been many instances of the venin she encounters wanting her specifically, commenting about how they'll be rewarded when they bring her into whatever greater venin or whoever it is. The second comment indicates that the venin, I think, are aware of Violet's training and current inability to properly aim her strikes, but they also seem to assume that they believe her power is only harnessed from the sky. We know Violet wields pure power that takes the shape of lightning, so I think that distinction is important. Before anything else can happen, Zaddy Venin Ryerson
Zaddy Venin Ryerson
makes his grand entrance with an explosion of shadows and the quick deaths of the remaining Dark Wielders. So when we first read the Onyx Storm excerpt, I did have questions about why Xaden always has his shields up, and then the detail about his flight jacket being wet, which indicated that he had been outside, had kind of felt suspicious as well. But now that we have more context, I am assuming he must have been outside on venin patrol, since in this set of chapters, we know his ability to feel the venin makes him especially useful for finding and killing them.
Oh, that's a really good call out. I remember us going deep down the rabbit hole on what Xaden was up to, but now it seems like it wasn't that important. But your logic seems very sound there.
So Violet is, of course, love-struck by his lovely gold-flecked onyx eyes, but we get confirmation that Xaden is still in his initiate venin phase when she thinks he may technically be an initiate, but he's nothing like the venin we just fought. Post-skirmish, Violet, Xaden, Garrick, Rhee, and Riddick leave a debrief with Colonel Panchek. They wonder why Panchek wasn't concerned that the venin were trying to break Jack out rather than going for the Wordstone, and that's an excellent point. Why do the venin care about Jack in particular? As far as we know, he's an ASIM at best, so it's not like he's an extra strong venin. But maybe given his knowledge of the Riders Quadrant and Basgiath, they like deem him as a decent asset for this knowledge. I don't know. I felt like that was kind of a weird thing that hopefully we'll get more context about later. But I also don't know how useful he would be anyway, because Garrick mentions that Mira installed wards around Jack's cell so that he can't hear or see anything.
My assumption would be that they want him because of the insight he can provide on basically everyone and everything related to Basgiath. He was there for 18 months, so he probably knows a lot about the Riders, their signets, and just their defenses in general. But you're right, it does seem a little odd that they're willing to risk any members of their ranks just for Jack, because as you said, he's just an assum, you know?
An ass? That's right. He's an assum.
He sure is an ass.
Something I found interesting is when Garrick says, from the look of the stones he's drained within the cell, he'll be dead within a week. This prompts the question of, do venin need to continue channeling from the ground to stay alive? Garrick's comment seems to indicate yes, but this is not totally confirmed. So we know that the ribosad chest suspended the venin in midair so that it couldn't drain from the ground, but we also didn't know how long it had actually been in there when it popped out an iron flame. We also know that any material that has already been drained of its magic, like the stones from the east of the Dunas River, can't be used as a link through which a venin could then drain a person as well. So Jack has already drained what little magic he could get out of the ground of his cell, and because it's drained, it can't conduct magic from anyone outside the cell, leaving him cut off from magic entirely.
To me, it's still unclear on whether venin can, quote unquote, starve to death. I personally feel like they can't. I think maybe they get really weak and even desiccate or become mummified. But the only things that can actually truly kill them are ally weapons, Violet's lightning, and presumably and Darna's flame. And so I'm wondering if it's one of those, like if you left Jack in there long enough, he would slowly start to mummify. But if you got close to him or touched him, he could then like pull power from you. I just don't
like suck it up like a sponge again.
Kind of, yeah, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know, but I hope we get...
Think about the Great War 600 years ago. The venin were pushed back into the Barrens for hundreds of years, and there's no magic left in the Barrens. They drained it all.
True.
So the venin have managed to survive somehow. So that would seem to indicate that they can't really starve to death.
Yeah, I don't know why Garrick said that then, unless he's just like misinformed, or maybe this is just something that needs to get revealed to us later.
Well, and to your point, they don't really know anything about the venin. Nobody does. Well, not nobody, but of our main group, they don't know.
The group then reaches the ground floor. Rhee and Riddick depart to go check on the rest of the squad. Garrick is dismissed to go to the sparring gym, and Xaden and Violet have a private conversation. The bulk of the conversation centers around Violet arguing that Xaden is still Xaden, and Xaden arguing that he is no longer the same. He mentions that he channeled from Sigil earlier while flying, and that she knows he's not whole. She senses it. So I guess channeling magic through a dragon will not add to the veninness of him because Sigil is the buffer. The fact that he's now venin but still using magic via the dragon just kind of confuses me a little bit, because if you're already venin, I don't know, it seems like magic should just be magic, but I'm probably overthinking this. I really need more information about how the bond between them has changed now that Xaden is venin. But in either case, it feels important that obviously Sigil feels a difference in how they are bonded. So,
yeah. This conversation also just made me so sad for Xaden. We know the bond between a rider and their dragon is sacred, and it's a very intimate relationship. And not only is Sigil icing Xaden out, but she's distancing herself because he's quote unquote not whole. And it really probably feels like for Xaden, there's no way he's ever going to be able to repair that, because Xaden doesn't think that he's ever going to be quote unquote cured. And that just made me really sad for Xaden. And Sigil too.
Oh. Sigil is an ice queen right now.
She really is.
Violet reassures Xaden that nothing could make her not love him when she asks him to answer if he still loves her. I think we're all swooning at Xaden's quote, kind of, when he says, I could reach the rank of Maven, lead armies of dark wielders against everyone we care for, and watch every vein in my body turn red as I channel all the power in the continent, and I would still love you. What I did doesn't change that. I'm not sure anything can.
So half of me was swooning and half of me wanted to scream. I am terrified that this is actually foreshadowing of Xaden's future. Maybe not all of it and to this degree, but I have considered the possibility that Xaden's story arc is going to be that he really can't stop himself from channeling and that Violet is going to have to be the one to pull him back with their love. And this quote kind of foreshadows that potential, and I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. But on a much lighter note, this line absolutely took me out. Violet responds by saying, telling me you're capable of horrible things while still loving me is pretty much your idea of foreplay. And it's funny because it's basically true.
Yeah, that's pretty much his MO. But more importantly than the love stuff is when Xaden mentions that the reason he knew Violet was in the interrogation chamber was because he can sense the venin the same way they can sense him. And I was like, ah! He goes on to say, I can feel them calling to me just like I can feel the source pulsing beneath my feet with its incomparable power because I'm one of them. So this was the definitive piece of info that clued us into why Xaden constantly keeps his shield up and why he's been responsible for half the venin they've killed so far. But honestly, I'm already beginning to get pretty anxious about Xaden's ability to ignore all this power and the venin beckoning to him. Like, a single person can only have so much control, and he's being constantly bombarded with temptation because he can't block this feeling without losing, access to his signet or just like being pass the fuck out or something. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just like take the signet blocking serum because that cuts him off from his signet. It may help him like not want to draw power, but then he wouldn't have a signet. And so the only cure is his own self-control for now.
And Violet's
not
love.
Cure. But and Violet's love. So
I hear your words. I agree with your words, but I don't like them. I don't like what you're saying.
Yeah. That ends chapter 2. Moving on to chapter 3. So according to this excerpt, Lilith did indeed know her daughter, even if Violet didn't think so. But basically, this just reiterates that everything we've already seen from her behavior. Violet loves hard, and she really loves Xaden. Violet would really take the till death do us part thing to heart, I think.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So there are 3 things I want to say about this excerpt. The first is, this is fucking hilarious, to be honest. As a mom of 2 girls, even though they are very young and not even close to dating age, I can totally relate to this sentiment. I have a feeling I will have an intuition about my children as they age. Lilith writes, I fear it will overrule the other gifts you've given her, and logic will cede its voice to love. And if that is not the absolute truth, this entire set of chapters is absolutely rife with examples of Violet ignoring all thought and logic when it comes to Xaden being a venin. And I was like, damn, Lilith, you really knew your daughter. 100%.
Sure. Yeah, she sure did.
And last, there have been some speculations about Violet's first 2 liaisons, as Lilith calls them. And I wonder if we're going to get more information about them and who they were in this book. It's clear they were both less than ideal based on Lilith's excerpt. And I have some thoughts about at least one of these liaisons that we will discuss in chapter 6.
Ooh, yeah. Violet is somehow shocked to learn just how real the situation is when she thinks, maybe it's more dire than I thought, but he's still whole, still him, just with heightened senses. And I was just like, facepalm. Like, how was this not immediately obvious to you? But also, the question of souls is brought up very often in discussion with the venin, and I'm really curious about that aspect of it. I have no thoughts about it, but I wonder if this will be addressed in some way later. They're always like, they're soulless. They trade a part of their soul. Like, they gave a part of their soul. Their soul is different now, So, I don't know. Ultimately, she refuses to show Xaden any signs of being scared of him, and Garrett comes back to get Violet to her meeting with the Senarium. There is a fair amount of tension going into this meeting because A, the Aretian riders haven't been pardoned yet for leaving Basgiath, and B, Violet is entering this meeting alone, and technically Aretia doesn't have an official seat on the council, though Brennan would be there. Xaden feels confident Violet will be fine because Llewellyn will be in the meeting representing Tyrrendor, and Violet can light them all up if she really wanted to, which I was like, probably not the best idea, but...
But, I mean, she could.
Speaking of Llewellyn, I totally forgot about him, and if you did too, here's a brief recap of who he is. In Iron Flame, the excerpt from Chapter 48 states, as a result of the Treaty of Aretia, the power to represent the province of Tyrrendor in the King's Senarium has hereby been transferred from the House of Ryerson to the House of Llewellyn, thus why he's representing Tyrrendor in this meeting. Also, since he's been secretly representing Aretia as well, the Senarium is not pleased with Llewellyn. Melgren then calls Violet into the meeting where she sees 6 nobles sit facing me at the closest end, representing each of Navarre's 6 provinces.
I fucking loved when Melgren calls Violet into the meeting and Xaden says, "I'll be right out here, deterred only by these wooden doors that hang an inch off the ground," in a very menacing way. I thought that was so funny and so hot.
Absolutely.
As soon as I saw the word Senarium, I was like, what the fuck is that? So I Googled it for everybody. What I found is the Latin definition, which means composed of 6 in a group, which makes perfect sense because there are 6 representatives of Navarre, 1 for each province. Now, as we talked about at the beginning of the episode, there seems to be some confusion kind of about what's going on politically here. So if you're not super politically minded or you just had trouble tracking who, what, where, when, why, how, we have a little bit of a breakdown of the Senarium for you. In the known world, there are 2 kingdoms, Port-Emil and Navarre. Navarre has 6 provinces. Lucerys, the leader or the representative of that province, is not named thus far. Chaldeer, who is represented by the Duke of Chaldeer. Tyrrendor, who is represented by Llewellyn, who is also currently the Duke of Tyrrendor. Moraine, who is represented by the Duchess of Moraine. Deaconshire, and the representative for that person is unnamed, and same for Elsum. Port-Emil has 3 provinces, and they are Crolla, Breivik, and Signissen, and they are all ruled by Queen Maria. Queen Maria is not present at this time, and it's not directly stated that Port-Emil's representatives are present in Violet's meeting with the Senarium, but later Brennan does mention to Mira or Violet in passing that he has to go back and beg Signissen to stay at the table. So we know that they do have representatives there. Also important to note, for Violet's meeting with the Senarium, General Melgren is present. Now, of course, he's not representing any individual province, but he is the commanding general of all the military forces of Navarre. So obviously, he's going to be involved in these discussions, since pretty much the entire Senarium right now is discussing how to protect Navarre.
Perfect. So as this meeting gets started and they're discussing, the Senarium has agreed basically to a task force whose goal is to find and recruit the 7th dragon breed with an aim to increase our numbers and hopefully provide insight into killing the venin. And this task force includes Andarna and Violet as well. I also find it kind of funny that Violet thinks that she's going to walk into this meeting and make all of these demands because they're Andarna's. And everyone's like, girl, sit down. You're still considered a deserter. And I was like, oh.
Oh my gosh. I know. Do not get me wrong. I love Violet and I always want things to go her way. But I think sometimes she gets kind of full of herself and forgets that in the chain of command, she is basically no one. Honestly, it was really funny when Melgren was like, it's a non-negotiable military operation, not a class field trip, which I hate to say it, but Melgren is right. Okay, this is not some fun expedition. This is a military operation to save the entire continent. And Violet's like, I didn't get my way. Girl, what did you think? What do you think was going to happen?
These are not my demands. They're Andarna's. And you have to listen to her.
And you have to listen to her.
Everybody's like, Andarna's not here. And you're under our command. So park your ass in a seat and listen up.
Exactly.
The Senarium ultimately makes the following decision. Captain Grady, the professor for RSC class, will lead the task force. He will also be configuring a squad of his choosing, and Xaden's involvement will be up to Grady's individual discretion, which of course makes Violet very mad. They also agree to consider approving Andarna's other requests, which we get answers to later. Violet brings up that letting the fliers enter the quadrant would help smooth over negotiations with Peromio, though Melgren counters it's useless to keep the fliers in Basgiath because they can't wield. However, the Duke of Chaldeer does consider her suggestion. As a quick reminder, the fliers can't use their magic inside the wards because the wards block magic that doesn't stem from dragons.
Also, I think it's an important distinction that Melgren doesn't want to let the fliers enter the quadrant because, from his perspective, they're basically just more mouths to feed and clothe and house, and they can't really help protect Navarre because they can't wield. So that's ultimately his primary concern. I'm sure there's an element of, well, they've been our enemies, quote unquote, for the past several hundred years. But in reality, to a certain extent, Melgren is right. They are 20-something-year-old flyers who have not finished their education, who are not ready to go into battle and support the defenses of Navarre. And I think Melgren probably has some concerns about how the flyers will integrate and be accepted, which we know is a totally fair concern given how chapter 5 and 6 go.
Llewellyn walks Violet out and hands her a missive from Takaris after the meeting, and it turns out to be a warning that she has 3 days to hold up her end of the bargain. So whatever deal she's made with Takaris is potentially hinted at in chapter 1, but otherwise we have no clue what this is generally referring to. But we do know that she is now counting on this backup plan to ensure that whatever they're doing doesn't fail. The next half of this chapter includes our first official spicy scene. Wow. Before we get into that, I did want to note that Violet fell asleep the previous night reading a book on Navarrian imports predating the trade agreement of resin. That sounds extremely boring, so no wonder she fell asleep. But I am going to note it in case something she read in there comes back up later.
I also love the little detail about how she got the book from Jasenia, who was with Sawyer when she went to go visit him. And I just love that Jasenia and Sawyer are still a blossoming romance. I think earlier, too, when they're talking to Sawyer, Violet notes that there's a handwritten note on the table in Jasenia's handwriting. I am very, very pro Jasenia and Sawyer, so I was happy about that. Something that I also thought was just so sweet about this scene is the fact that Xaden took her book and marked the page she was on with his dagger. I know this is such a little thing, but it's so thoughtful and honestly hot. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's not hot. Not everything Xaden does is hot. Well, almost everything. But, you know, it was sweet. It was thoughtful. I'm down bad.
You guys are going to notice that most of the cute things about Xaden are noted by Addison. And I, mostly the whole time, was just like, plot, plot, plot. And Addison was like, Xaden Ryerson said this. Xaden Ryerson did that. Which, like, don't get me wrong. Yes, Sadie is hot. We love him, of course. However, I want to know what the hell is going on in this book. And so I was honed in on plot. Okay.
Yeah, I only care what happens in this book because it affects Xaden. So without him, you know.
Fair enough, yeah.
I'll try not to fangirl so hard about him, but I really do love him. You know how people like to rank their top book boyfriends? Xaden is definitely at the top of my list. He has not been unseated. There's some contenders, but so far, no one can touch him.
Yeah. You know, he's a very solid book boyfriend for sure. And he deserves the hype that he gets, so.
Oh, yeah, he's very solid.
Violet attempts to get up, and the spicy scene begins as Xaden's shadows wrap around her waist, bringing her into his kiss. We're not going to get into the rest of the details, but I hope everyone has bookmarked this scene for later. There were a couple key things that happened, though, that are very notable. First, Xaden mentions, I can feel it. I can feel you, which that can be interpreted a couple ways. But this is definitely in reference to the power that Violet has.
Oh, absolutely. I thought the exact same thing. I think when you're first reading it, it's supposed to come off with this sexual connotation.
Yes.
It's like really like, oh, I can feel you. But I absolutely think he's talking about her power here. I do not think it's sexual. I think he is, for the first time, you know, let his control down around her, let his barrier down, and he is sensing the power coursing through her veins, which is really fucking ominous.
Second, Violet thinks, I grasp for the shimmering onyx that connects our minds and pour my pure, acute need into it. We know Violet's power rises up during spicy time, but immediately after this, Xaden reaches for the headboard and then blocks the bond. We see that on the headboard there are 2 faint marks of discoloration right where his thumbs had been, and Violet wonders, did he just channel? This gets explained in the next chapter, but we were right to be concerned about Violet's constant proximity to Xaden and how much control he really has.
Especially when Violet takes off her clothes.
Moving on to chapter 4. Violet continues trying to insist it's not a big deal, but Xaden clarifies what it felt like for him. He says, the second your power rose, I felt it and remembered why I promised myself I wasn't going to touch you. I was so close. I can't afford to lose control around you. To me, this felt like Violet inadvertently sent her power down the bond, which then triggered Xaden's venonness, since the venin can feel power / magic that exists in the ground and just in whoever has magic channeling through them. And this also leads me to believe that Violet's pure power she has could be of a similar nature to what exists in the ground. I feel this also is supported by how badly all the venin in general want her and access to her power, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think so too. In relation to this scene, Xaden losing control around Violet honestly did not come as a shock to me. And I feel like this honestly has been foreshadowed since they first kissed back in Fourth Wing. When Violet is with Xaden, he loses control. She's the only one that has that effect on him. Also, the romantic spicy part of me is fucking raging because now I feel like we're going to spend the whole damn book with them just giving each other longing glances and Xaden refusing to give in because he's afraid he will hurt her, which means buckle up, everybody. It's going to be a very dry book.
Drier than the Barrens.
Oh my God.
So after this, Violet, of course, looks into Xaden's eyes and she doesn't see any sign of red. But Xaden says, I didn't even feel myself taking anything, but I obviously did, referring to the headboard. They reiterate the importance of avoiding activities where he can't be trusted to keep control, and then he also mentions another notable moment. Xaden says, that memory of yours was really hot, and Violet responds, I'm not quite sure how I even did it. Is the thought sharing an intrinsic thing or a bond thing? It's happened more than once with us. So what do you think this is referencing?
So to be honest, I don't really understand this conversation. To me, this is clearly because of their bond and has nothing to do with Xaden being an intrinsic. Their bond allows them to communicate and send feelings to each other, even involuntarily sometimes. So to me, it's not a stretch at all that their literal mind connection allows them to share memories. I just don't see how that could be an intrinsic thing. This comment is a little odd to me.
I could definitely see it just being a bond thing. I could also see a situation with this being like an expansion of his intrinsic abilities because we don't really know the full range of capacity and all the different things that he can do. As much as we know currently, he can sense people's intentions and kind of know what people are going to do based off of that. But who's to say his abilities haven't expanded since then? We know intrinsic.
True.
Back in Fourth Wing, there was the intrinsic that was killed because he started hearing everybody's voices and stuff inside his head. And so intrinsic seems like a pretty broad term. I really would like more clarification about what all these signets can actually do and what they mean. Because I feel like we only get very specific examples, but then things change or their abilities grow and the range of things that each person and their signet can do expands. Like with Mira, for example, Mira finally manifests her own wards and we're like, whoa. And so it doesn't seem out of the realm of possibility that sharing a memory or sharing a form of your thought is related to being an intrinsic, I guess. So we really don't know for sure.
Well, and the thing is, we'll never really get that information because Navarre kills all intrinsics.
True.
So Xaden is really on his own pioneering the research here because to our knowledge, he's the only living intrinsic. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, every signet that we've encountered, there's training involved. There's expansion, right? Think about Violet. The first time she manifested, she could wield 10 strikes. Now she can wield a whole bunch. Now she's learning control. And so I think your logic is pretty sound there, that this should just be an expansion of Xaden's ability because his signet is getting more trained.
They quickly get dressed and they go on to discuss Xaden's meeting with Llewellyn and Duke Lindell.
It's important to note that Violet points out that all three of the highest houses of Tyrrendor are here. She is referring to Xaden, who is the current Duke of Aretian, Llewellyn, who is the current Duke of Tyrrendor, and now Duke Lindell, who we know from Fourth Wing. He is introduced to us in conversation because he fostered Liam and Xaden, and he is from House Turfane. You've got a lot of power players from Tyrrendor here. Xaden and Violet talk about the conundrum the Senarium is facing in negotiations. It's a bit confusing, but at its core, here are the issues. Poor Emil wants three things from Navarre. 1, they want the fliers to be safe behind Navarrian wards. 2, they want alloy weapons to fight the venin with, which Basgiath can produce because they have a luminary. 3, they want Navarre to take in Prologue-Ch refugees, anybody who is fleeing over the border to get away from the venin. Something else that is important to note later that is not directly discussed in this conversation is Brennan also points out to Mira later that Queen Maria of Poor Emil hopes the 7th breed dragon might know how to defeat the venin, and Violet going on her task force mission is part of the hope that's keeping them at the negotiation table in the first place. Navarre wants/needs one thing from Poor Emil, and that is to quit fucking attacking the outposts and stealing the weapons because it weakens the boundary of the wards. But you can understand Poor Emil's position and desperation because the only thing that can kill venin are those weapons, and they don't have a way to produce them, so obviously they're gonna fucking steal them.
Yeah.
Violet points out that Poor Emil could get everything they wanted by forming an alliance exclusively with Aretian, but Aretian does not have fully functioning wards, so they're really put into a position where they really do need to form this alliance with Navarre.
Next, they are interrupted by quite the group outside the door, including Brennan, Garrick, Llewellyn, Bodhi, and Imogen. I did find it funny that among all the squabble, Imogen tries to make a jab at Garrick and says, given how rested you look, I'm guessing you got plenty of that in Nina Schrensauer's bed last night. How disappointing to her. It was at this moment that I remembered Imogen has a crush on Garrick, and I'm surprised that nothing has happened yet between them. This gets brought up in Fourth Wing originally, and then it's never addressed again. But now I'm like, when is something gonna ever happen with them? I don't know.
Dude, yes, I've been wondering about this. Garrick even calls her out and says she sounds a little jealous, which, yeah, she does. Imogen seems like the kind of woman to go for what she wants, so it honestly surprises me that she's never just been outright honest with Garrick. I do wonder if we'll see something happen between the two of them in this book, either positive or negative, right? Imogen's I like you, and he's like, I'm sorry, I don't see you that way. Or, I'm just saying, not everybody can all be in love with each other, okay? We can't have every ship that we want, okay? Or our hope, obviously, that, Imogen's like, I like you, and he's like, I like you too, and we should hold hands, and do other things. And we hope that works out for them.
So Mira interrupts the hallway conversation, signaling her arrival back from whatever side mission Violet had planned with her. Now, it hasn't been explicitly confirmed that Mira's side quest is connected to Violet's side plan with Takaris that she has 3 days to figure out now. But when Violet thinks, thank you, Amari, we have 48 hours and a shot, that seems to make the connection that they are connected to each other. Everyone scatters for separate activities, and Mira reveals what she's brought back. First, she gives Violet a new conduit, courtesy of Felix.
Hashtag thank you, Felix.
Second, she pulls out a wooden runed practice disc, and on the disc, there are 3 runes tempered into the disc, 1 for levitation in the middle, then 2 overlapping layers for what appear to be sound shielding and warmth, and then the outermost line, warmth, is broken by a small green shoot of new growth. Apparently, Kylan, also known as Battle Axe, who is a member of the Assembly in Aretian, is an agrarian, aka a plant wielder. He was able to alter the material that the rune was tempered into and change its form without destroying the rune, which actually is kind of interesting because Darna mentions her ability to kind of alter states. And now we have Battle-Axe, who, as Navarrian, seems to be able to alter a material as well. So I don't know what's going on with that. Alteration is important. Also, Mira says that an experiment to nullify one rune without affecting other runes can be done because the rune for warmth on the disc was nullified while the sound shield rune remained intact. All of this is to say, this is clearly an important concept that has been proven, but we aren't exactly sure what it's going to be used for. We know it's connected to the fliers since they have to figure out a solution that allows them to be useful and stay within Navarre's wards, as is confirmed later by Mira when she shows the disc to Brennan. Before they change topics, Mira mentions, "Don't tell the others yet. We have to give the Senarium a chance to do the right thing, and the fewer people who know, the fewer people who are executed for reason." Again, we don't know exactly what they were planning, but this seems to indicate that if the Senarium doesn't make the choice that they want, they are going to do something without permission, which could be considered illegal by Navarre.
And I think Violet echoes that thought at the end of chapter 6, where she's like, I could be a traitor in the morning. So whatever they're going to do is definitely fucking illegal.
And happening soon. Like, she's about to go do that too.
Oh, yeah. Like, I think that's probably going to be the focus at the next set of chapters, if I had to guess.
Brennan comes back into the conversation to mention that the only thing the Senarium can agree on is that the fliers will be allowed to tour the quadrant, and there will be a task force going with Violet. Mira was not previously informed of Violet's mission within Darna, and she is pretty pissed. Brennan assures her that this is a Queen-sanctioned task because Queen Maria hopes the 7th breed might know how to defeat the venin, given the age of Andarna's egg. As a quick recap about Andarna, her egg has been in existence for 650 years, and then she hatches 2 years prior to bonding Violet. The first major war, aka the Great War between the first 6 riders and General Daramore, plus the venin, occurred about 600 years ago. So there's approximately 50 years of history and knowledge that Andarna is aware of prior to the venin popping up. Mira is still against the idea of this mission, fearing for Violet's safety, and Taran agrees. He tells Violet if a den of our kind chose to leave, chose to hide, they will not welcome our intrusion. But most importantly, Violet reminds Mira that Brennan had to agree because Aretian needs another one of Andarna's kind to fire their wardstone, since an individual dragon's fire can only be used once to fire a wardstone, and she already used hers to fire Basgiath.
Mira is ultimately against the idea because she doesn't want to send Violet into enemy territory, and she thinks a mission like this could quite literally take decades, which means even if Violet was successful, it would be too late anyways. Ultimately, she's just a protective big sister, and she doesn't want Violet in harm's way. I feel pretty strongly that Mira will end up on the task force with Violet. I feel like it's going to be a situation if Grady doesn't pick Mira, then I think she'll just threaten bodily harm against him and be like,
You're just going to like bully them.
Put my name on the list. No, honestly, that's such a Mira thing to do. Mira will be on that task force. I guarantee it.
That checks out. Mira goes on to drop a truth bomb, shoving missives at Brennan, and states they basically have 6 months before the wards give out, which is really scary because this dramatically shortens the timeline. Before the conversation ends, Mira shows Brennan the rune disc and says, "We found a way to keep the fliers at Basgiath safely." And Violet urges Brennan to take it to the Senarium so that they have a chance at doing the right thing, but they know it's highly likely that the Senarium will refuse. Moving on to chapter 5. So the excerpt from this chapter mentions how the riders are specifically selected and trained to be particularly cruel, and I think it's pretty fitting for what happens in these next 2 chapters. Violet and her squad wait in the gathering hall for news regarding the Senarium's decisions. The fact that Violet specifically mentioned that the venin and Jaxel having silver hair again makes it extra clear to me that this is going to be important.
Also, in this conversation, I could not stop laughing when Rhiannon starts talking about what's going on with the fliers and the riders, and she says, "It's not like Atos cared who any of us were fucking last year." And then Riddick shoulder bumps Violet and says, "So not true." Dane may have not cared about everyone else, but he definitely cared who Violet was engaging in relations with.
100%.
But leave it to Riddick to fucking point that out.
I love him. He's
Me
the best.
too. He really is.
Eventually, some sort of rumor makes its way through the hall until Violet realizes that the only riders left there are Aretian ones. And it turns out that Aura Binehaven, the wing leader for First Wing, is attempting to force a challenge against one of Tail Section's fliers. Violet's squad runs out to the courtyard where there is a clear division between Navarrian riders and Aretian riders and flyers. It's very obvious that there's some sort of de-escalation that needs to take place because everyone is ready to fight and chants for a challenge keep growing louder and louder.
Dane even tells the squad when he gets there to de-escalate at all costs. And Riddick says, if only we were taught those techniques, which is totally true. Why is literally everything Riddick says so funny? I know we're going to say this every freaking episode 50 times. I just freaking love him. I love him so much.
Him and Darna carry the team.
They really fucking do. They really do. I also thought it was funny when Violet pushes Kat back to stop her from fighting, and Kat tries to use her emotional manipulating power on Violet, but Violet just cuts her off and is like, oh, shut up. You can't even wheel behind the wards.
That's like the ultimate comeback. What are you going to do? You can't do anything.
You
so
literally
just
can't do shit. Exactly.
So the Navarrian riders are pissed that the flyers haven't earned their right to be there, but they aren't willing to listen to any Aretian rider because as deserters, they have no authority and they blame them for the wards falling. Dane tries to step in and he ends up taking the challenge against Aura instead. Aura is honestly kind of a little bitch, and I don't agree with anything that she's saying because, as Riddick points out, her little wing produced Jack Barlow. And I was like, damn straight. That's right.
Once again, Riddick striking verbal gold. Violet also thinks it would be really nice if Xaden didn't have his shields up right now. And once again, pessimistic, grumpy Terran drops a line, the Dark One cannot unite what he broke, which is so dramatic, so over the top. But it really just shows how pissed Terran is at Xaden. And it's not even that he's mad at him. It's like he thinks that he is irreparable. Like there's no hope for him.
Yeah, that's true. Fair enough.
Did you like my Terran impression? I'll do that more often if you liked it.
Yeah,
He's gonna like
the
just do the gravel.
The curmudgeon old dragon, grandpa dragon.
Hey, he's middle-aged, okay?
He's old.
Yeah, he's like 100, but that's like middle age for a dragon.
He gives boomer energy.
and Darna's over there with the Gen Z, super supportive. Yeah. Let's work through our trauma and grieve.
Pretty much, yeah. It becomes very clear that in a challenge that involves signets, Aura's fire wielding definitely trumps memory wielding every single time. Womp womp for Dane. Somehow, it takes 2 reminders from Darna for Violet to put it together of what she is implying she go do. Right as Aura flirts her hand, Violet throws a dagger, pinning her glove back before her hand can reach Dane. She then steps in to say, if you're gonna wield, then it's me you'll be dealing with. Bitch. And that ends the chapter.
I don't think Violet said bitch. I think Lorene added that.
No, she didn't. But that was my little dramatic insert.
But you know Violet was thinking it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, moving on to chapter 6. Violet gets the crowd going with a laser light show. Just kidding. She basically just flashes her lightning, which is still very scary. And just like that, Aura's mouth hangs for a moment, which was really funny to me because Aura went like King Prawn. And if you guys didn't know, in our latest Queen of Shadows episodes, ever since that Pepe the King Prawn meme came out all over TikTok and everything, it's so fitting for every single scenario. You get some crazy plot twist, King Prawn. Somebody learns something really crazy, King Prawn. It fits every scenario. And basically, I was imagining Aura watching Violet show everybody up with her lightning, and she's like, oh.
In Aura's case, she fucked around and found out King Prawn, you know?
Yep, basically. Yeah.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, please go look that up because we're going to try not to overdo it, but like it really is just so fitting. So if we say King Prawn, that way you know what we're talking about.
It's one of my favorite memes, so.
It's so funny.
So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I know this is a very tense moment for all the writers and all of our favorite characters, but I'm picturing all of this going down Mean Girls style, basically. Like something about their comments and all their little comebacks with each other gives off a very like early 2000s era movie. You know, But more importantly, Violet enlightens the Navarrian riders by telling them the only reason you survived the attack is because we gained access to the knowledge Navarre purposely hid from us. We stole it. We translated it. We saved your ass. Ultimately, Violet chooses to appeal to them with the truth, and I liked it when she says, "You've seen what's out there. Either this alliance begins right here with us, with our generation, or we will be the last dragon riders and griffin flyers on the continent." Just in time, Devera, Amaterio, and Kaori come outside to back Violet up. In particular, Amaterio notes, "I like our odds. The last time a Shadow and Lightning wielder fought side by side, they managed to drive the venin back in the Barrens for a few hundred years. We'll figure out how to do this again." And of course, I was like, ah!
You were like, King Prawn!
King Prawn! So we were set up to get this information from the excerpt in chapter 2 about, when rare signets have manifested in history. But this is crazy because having these signets occur in the same time period is very significant. As Violet notes, these two signets haven't manifested concurrently since the Great War, aka the very first war 600 years ago. Also, I am curious about who the past lightning and shadow wielders were. I just really want to know.
My guess would be for sure some of the first 6, right? One of them was a shadow, one of them was a lightning wielder. Probably. But it said it's manifested at one other time concurrently in history. So yes. No idea, no clue on that. But no, that is definitely a point of curiosity for me. Once Devera arrives, she officially ends it when she says, "You're released from whatever it was you thought you were doing here." And I was like, fucking devastating. She really just put them all in their place so fast.
I like how everyone was like, "You guys have been just watching us this whole time." They just showed up and just let it play out.
But honestly, that's good strategy. I mean, really, her logic is sound. She's like, it's in a controlled environment. This is bound to happen. You need to get out of your system. It's very similar to how Brennan and the Assembly handled the integration of flyers and riders and Iron Flame. That's when they had that whole day where they're like, you guys can just punch each other, you can fight it out, and then we're fucking done. And that's sort of what needs to happen here, honestly. Also, about this scene, one thing you guys need to know about me is that I am a hardcore Dane defender, okay? And if that triggers you, we should talk. You need to DM me and we'll have a conversation, a loving, respectful conversation. But I'm going to prove with evidence why you need to be on my side. Okay. But I love this moment between Dane and Violet when he thanks her for saving his ass and she thanks him for coming without hesitation when she needed him. And then Violet thinks, "It hits me how different things might have been if he'd shown the same faith in me during my first year as he did today." Violet is right. Don't get me wrong. When I say Dane Defender, I don't mean to imply that I think he's a perfect character. He's not. He's an imperfect 21-year-old boy, right? All of our characters are. But despite all of that, I am happy that their friendship is on the mend. I am very pro Dane redemption arc. I want good things for Dane. I like Dane. I care about Dane. And yeah, I mean, I want him to be happy.
Yeah, I totally agree. Dane definitely made some wrong decisions for sure. He has done some things that you can look at and be like, okay, as an individual action goes, that was not the right thing to do. However, in general, as a whole, Dane is not necessarily bad in my opinion. And I think he's more than redeemed himself at this point, by saving Violet from Ish and all of that, and then joining them in Aretian and making that decision to go against leadership and all of that. I think he's made up for it. But I agree that it's good to see them repairing their friendship. So
yeah, because I mean, that's her oldest friend and she points that out often. And I can't imagine being friends with someone my entire life and then just never talking to them again, and also having to see them regularly.
Mm-hmm. Rhee and Riddick depart while Brennan, Violet, Xaden, Eric, Llewellyn, and Mira converse. Apparently, the Senarium did agree to let the riot stay, referring to the Aretian riders.
Arik correctly guesses that Halden, his older brother, complicated the negotiations. There has been a fan theory that one of Violet's previous relationships might have been with Halden. We know from a conversation that Xaden and Violet had, I believe in Iron Flame, that one of her former trysts was a person in the infantry, but the other one is unknown. Now, Violet would have seen Halden regularly because of Lilith's position as General of Basgiath and how closely she would need to work with the royal family. After reading this exchange, my gut says they were definitely a thing. First and foremost, Violet blanches after hearing Halden's name, and Auric shoots her a knowing look, and she glares back at him. Then she makes a comment about him having a temper. How would she know that about him unless she had spent a fair amount of time with him, perhaps when they were dating? To further bolster this theory, it's described that Mira studies Violet and Xaden, but keeps quiet. I just fucking know that she was doing like the big sister thing where she's watching both of them to see if either one of them reacts when Halden's name is mentioned, because Mira is like, oh shit, I don't know if Violet has told Xaden about Halden. So she's kind of like looking at her like, girl, like, who knows what here?
Yeah. Also, I thought it was funny that Taryn jumps in to ask Halden, and Violet swears she can feel his non-existent eyebrows raise.
See, even Taryn is picking up on that shit. You just freaking know it, okay? And
he's nosy.
He is so nosy. Taryn is a little gossip, okay? I feel like he acts like he's above all that, but he likes to know what's up. He likes to know what's up. And then, of course, the prize for the best reaction goes to Endarna, because she says, so we kill him if he makes her uncomfortable. Problem solved.
Endarna.
I know. She's so funny. And then, okay, this is my last piece of evidence. I swear I'm almost done. Violet says to Endarna, you cannot kill the heir to the throne, even though I've been tempted myself a time or two. That just screams to me that they were in a relationship, and we know he has a temper, so they probably fought a lot. And she was just like, oh, I just want to kill you, you know, like that kind of vibe. So it really feels like, based off this interaction, that's where we're going to head. If not, then this is just a very weird written scene. I'm going to say I'm willing to die in this hill, actually, already. I'm planting my flag. I'm here.
No, this feels very suspiciously placed. I feel like it was definitely indicating there is some kind of history between Halden and Violet. So.
Oh, totally. Well, and then to take it back to the excerpt in the set of chapters from Lilith, who's like, if her first two romantic attachments were any indication, she has terrible taste in men.
Yeah, true that. So they finally get to the core of the mission, and it's announced that Halden has been appointed as part of the task force for Violet and Endarna's mission. The fact that Halden going as a representative of Navarre indicates that the Senarium believes this mission will take them to the Isle Kingdoms or northward. And to give a little bit of information about the Isle Kingdoms, they are comprised of 5 large and 13 smaller islands that surround the continent in every direction. We also know that Navarre hasn't been trading with the Isle Kingdoms for centuries at this point. The Isle Kingdoms also stopped trading with Takaris because they felt it was too dangerous. Queen Maria refused all proposals from the Isle Kingdoms as well, so there's definitely some bad blood between the Isle Kingdoms and the rest of the main continent for reasons that have not been explained yet. But seems like we're going to head that way.
I hope so.
Eric also figures that they wanted him to present for this announcement to try and bait him into revealing he is alive and well, since King Tari still had yet to figure out that Eric was actually in Basgiath rather than traveling for a birthday tour like he thought.
Is he the worst dad ever? Is he the worst dad ever, honestly? It's important to note they want Auric to do this because Halden is next in line to the throne, and he's arguably going on a death mission. So it would put everyone in the Senarium as well and for the negotiations at ease, knowing that there's still one heir alive and well. Because as it stands from their perspective, Auric could be dead in a ditch somewhere, and Halden's about to go on this death mission. So that leaves the king heirless. So that would make any kingdom nervous. People do not like when there's not a clear heir, hence the entire plot of House of the Dragon.
Yep. Basically. As far as the rest of Endarna's demands go, the Senarium agrees to a full pardon for the riders that flew to Aratia, which will be finalized once the accord with Aratia has been signed in the morning. Endarna will not be required to submit for examination, and most importantly, Endarna will be allowed to hunt in the king's forest whenever she wants. Against a fancy sheep. Unfortunately, the Senarium did not agree to allow the fliers to stay, which complicates things for Violet in terms of her plans with Viscount Takaris. Violet moves on to her prep for the mission, and Brennan confirms that she will have access to every resource, including the Royal Library, which, thank God, because it's about time that they stop hiding shit from everybody, and hopefully there's some useful information hiding somewhere in those libraries. Finally, we also learned that in exchange for keeping the Aretian fliers in Navarre, the king and the Senarium agreed to give Tyrrendor back to Xaden, upgrading him to Duke Zaddy Ryerson. Plus, he now has his seat back with the Senarium. Ordinarily, this would be great news. However, Xaden is torn over this decision because he's venin. But there is no one else to take over control, and he can't reject this gift because it would be obvious that something is wrong. Plus, not to mention, both Llewellyn and Duke Lindell are being sanctioned for their sympathy to Aratia. So that makes them ineligible to take over Tyrrendor. Before the chapter ends, Xaden makes Violet promise that she would sound the alarm if Xaden ever gets to a point of no return and to keep Tyrrendor safe, even if it's from him.
Aww.
So, and then he leaves with Garrick to fulfill orders, leaving Violet more determined than ever to find a cure and save the alliance with Tikaris. This meeting with the Assembly is closed. And now we just have our favorite moments to share.
My first favorite moment is when Violet thinks, maybe the god of death will curse me for keeping my mother's personal journals, but it's not like I wouldn't have a few choice words for him should we meet anyway. And I just like that Violet is not scared of anyone or anything, even the god of death.
My favorite one was with Taryn when they're out on their patrol and Darna's talking to them too. And she's like, and yet yours miraculously carries the burden of your ego. And then Taryn's like, go find a sheep and let the adults work.
I feel like all of our favorite moments are just going to be Indarna, Taryn, and Riddick. So I have another one from Indarna. When she says, bring their bodies outside once you're done killing them so we can roast them for fun.
She's pretty violent.
She really is.
Funny because Violet is pretty violent sometimes too. So
yeah.
My next favorite one is when is also part of the flight patrol. And it's just the fact that Taryn's like getting really annoyed with Atrum. He's like, this dragon needs to watch where they're going. And he like snaps at them to try and teach him a lesson. And Violet's like, whoa, chill, Taryn. Like he didn't know.
When Xaden bursts into the room and kills the rest of the venin that are attacking Violet when they're trying to free Jack Barlow, I just freaking love when Xaden uses his shadows to show affection to Violet, like when he brushes her cheek or he wraps them around her waist. There's just something about that is just like, it's so seductive. I'm not even going to lie. It really is.
On a similar Xaden note, I liked his quote when he says, well, it was a little ominous too, but the underlining sentiment was cute. And he says, I could reach the rank of Maven, lead the armies of Darkfielders against everyone we care for, and watch every venin in my body turn red as I channel all the power in the continent, and I would still love you. What I did doesn't change that. I'm not sure anything can.
Oh, that's funny because my next one follows that immediately when Violet says, telling me you're capable of horrible things while still loving me is pretty much your idea of foreplay.
Yep. Cute. I also found it hilarious when everybody's concerned about them sleeping in the same bed together. And then Xaden's like, you try to dictate the occupants of Violet's bed again, and we're gonna have problems.
I like when they're all in the hallway outside of Violet's bedroom and Imogen is giving Garrick shit about him being in Nina's bedroom. And Mira walks up and she's like, seriously, figure your shit out, kids. We're in the middle of a war. She's so practical.
You guys are stupid. I know, yeah.
Right?
I also liked when just outside, before Violet meets with the Senarium, Xaden's like, I'll be right out here, deterred by these wooden doors that hang an inch off the ground. And then Violet's like, subtle. And he's like, never going to be.
To switch gears, I really loved Violet's speech to all of the writers and flyers. It was really inspiring and appropriately shows the gravity of the situation. I know Violet doesn't think of herself as a leader, but she really is.
I really liked that as well. She had a very nice, inspiring speech. And my last favorite quote was when Riddick, he's like, shh, it's more fun when she blows shit up. Like, they're just like waiting for her to do something.
My last one is also from Riddick when he says, Not sure I'd brag about being in the wing that produced Jack Barlow. And if that ain't the truth.
Yeah, literally.
Oh, man.
So that now concludes our very first episode of Onyx Storm. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we are so glad that you found us. So please leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and follow us on Instagram or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. That's all we've got for you guys today.
So stay violent.
And we'll catch you all next week. Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers. Dispatching a venin that was diagnosed as a scribe. Whoops. Except for Violet and Arik, who go with Mira and Brennan, who go with... Blah, 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 blah. Okay.
Since that has been the path that the venin.
The venom.
Alloy daggers are made of an amalgamation of how do you say that? Palladium?
Palladium.
Okay.
Palladium.
I kind of forgot about this, but Takara. I'm having so many like misspeeches.
Me too.
Today.
We'd be misspeaking. Okay. Misspeaking the words. It is now 2 weeks after the Battle of Basgiath. Oh, wow. That's going to get old really fast. Okay.
Since the venin can feel the power